Welcome to the Pursuit of Progress podcast, where every episode is dedicated towards finding out the success strategies and even failures of some of the greatest coaches in the industry from all walks of life, from in person training to online training, which is why I'm really excited to bring on Coach Melissa to the podcast. Welcome, Melissa. For those of you guys who have not had the opportunity to connect with somewhere on social media, which means you've probably been living under a rock at some point in time, or you've never done a shrimp squat. I don't know. But if you guys are not already connected to Coach Melissa, I had the opportunity actually to connect with Melissa. I say like I met her before she was famous. I met her before at a techno gym event. Fortunate to get to know her a little bit there as a coach and trainer. One of the many, surprisingly, I've had a lot of Canadians on the show already, which I love. Canadian fitness is hot. But Melissa is primarily now spending most of her time as an online coach and trainer, and I'm going to let her talk a little bit about that. But for those of you guys who do end up connecting with and following the links in the description, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this via podcast, you'll see that, Melissa has, she's engaged and created quite a following on a number of different platforms. And, we call her TikTok famous. As I got some fun questions, dive in a little bit about her kind of viral TikTok video that really, I feel like, probably catapulted a lot of what she's doing in the online world now and the individuals that she's working with. But Melissa, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Love it. Love having you on here. So, just to give us more insight into what you're doing right now, because really, the primary listener base and focus of the podcast at this stage is more trainers who are trying to figure out and navigate their industry or navigate their path, and especially the first 3 to 5 years, which we all know how challenging that can be. But I think that there's some fun insight to be drawn from what you're doing now, and then kind of going back to where things began for you. So, talk to us about what you primarily do now. Give us some insight into your business and online coaching and training.
For sure. So, like you mentioned, I'm 100% online now, which was more of a necessity than a dream, I guess. 3, 5 years ago, I didn't really see myself where I am now, but I feel very blessed and fortunate to be here. Because once you stop trading your time for money, that's like a freedom that you never want to give up again. So I feel really lucky to be able to do what I do now, for sure.
Love, I love that. And primarily with your online business, I'm sure you work with a wide variety, but do you have kind of like a niche or group of clients that you primarily work with more that you specialize in with your online business?
Yeah, I say I specialize in beginners. So my primary focus is teaching people absolutely new to the gym that are maybe a little bit afraid of injury or hurting themselves. My background in athletic therapy sort of ties into that niche really well. So I like to work with beginners that are already a little bit motivated, like getting to the gym's not so much an issue for them, but they're like, what the heck do I do while I'm here?
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, I'll give everyone, you're like an NFL player. I'm gonna give them your stats right now, or CFL player.
Okay.
Let's put it that way, right? So on TikTok, and you might have more now from when I looked, but TikTok, 567,000 followers, Instagram, 134,000 followers. I would say there's a lot of people that we get to work with through the Axiom Academy, and even many that might be listening that have aspirations of doing more, maybe doing more in the online world, having more impact, like you're now reaching so many more people. How did that all happen for you? I feel like I have no idea now what the numbers were. When we first met, I was like, all right, this girl's got a little bit of like an online following, but nothing like right now. How did that all play out for you? How did you really like, and I know it's probably a long story, but more so like, where did it all start with you really seeing like, okay, wow, there's something here in this online world. Maybe I should lean into this.
Yeah, good question. I've always been Instagram was kind of like my main platform, just I think because of the generation that I was sort of born into. But I didn't have like a long-term strategy. I just kind of thought I wanted to create an audience because I wasn't even personal training at the time, but I just knew I wanted an audience to do something with it someday, but I didn't really know what that was.
Yeah.
And TikTok was really the platform that kind of exploded for me. I had a photographer friend when I was personal training. He was like, you got to download this TikTok app. He's like, you need to make a fitness challenge. You'll go viral. And I kind of brushed him off. I'm like, yeah, it's that easy. Like, I'll just do that. And ironically, that is exactly what happened. I was reluctant to download the app. I was like, it's for kids. I'm not doing it. And then I was like, fine, I'll do it. And yeah, it just, I was trying so hard creating content that I thought would do well. And then one day I just threw up little fitness challenge, took me like 30 seconds and it just exploded. And then all of a sudden the news wanted to cover it. I was on like 3 radio stations. It was such a surreal, bizarre experience. But and that sort of like launched my my online presence through that platform. And then I met someone and they were like, well, how are you monetizing this? And I was like, I'm not. I just do it like for
What do you
fun.
mean?
And then that kind of like opened my eyes. And was like, maybe I should get a business coach and like learn something about this. So that's kind of how that unfolded.
That's very cool. And what was the video? What was the video? You said you shared a fitness challenge, and I'm sure people from the
Oh,
show will be able to go click and find it. But what was the challenge?
yeah, the shrimp squat challenge where basically you're starting half kneeling, grab your back foot with 2 hands behind your back and then stand up. So I think the reason why it took off is it looks very simple. So people are like, "Ah, I could do
For
that." And then
sure. Yeah. And then you do it and you're like, "What? Why can I not do this? Melissa made it look so easy."
yeah.
Love that. That's awesome. Well, very cool. Well, I want to dive more into some of the online stuff because I do think that that is extremely, it's not just interesting and it's not really new. Like online training has been growing for a long time. And for you, and I think for many others, like COVID maybe was the catalyst. But talk to me about like, how did you first get into fitness and training? Like, let's go back to the origin story, right? A little bit more understanding like your background, how you got into training, just so we have a better idea of who we're talking with right now.
Sure. I mean, I grew up playing all sorts of sports. I was a pretty talented athlete. And so in high school, I first started training when I was like 14 years old. And I knew that training would help me become a better athlete in theory. But in terms of how to actually implement that, I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't really have a lot of mentors around to teach me. Our gym staff were kind of, they knew a little bit, but not a lot. So I started taking an internship when I was in high school. We did a co-op with a personal trainer, and I remember vividly standing on like a Bosu ball doing bicep curls because I was like, oh, I'm working my core and training. Like that's literally where I started.
Wah, wah.
And then I remember in high school too thinking like maybe about becoming a personal trainer, but at the time I literally thought I'm like, well, I don't have a six pack, so I can't do that. Like, who's gonna hire me as a trainer without a six pack? That's literally what I thought. My little 14-year-old self. So I actually went into athletic therapy instead, so rehab, and I thought I wanted to work with high level athletes doing that. And then once I actually got experience in that, I realized not exactly the pathway for me, but I just always had a love for training. And I actually tore my ACL my very last year of school playing college volleyball. And so when I was rehabbing, a girl that I knew was opening up a new LA Fitness and they were looking to hire personal trainers. So I reached out to her. I said, I can't train anybody right now because I just had surgery, but keep me in mind, for the future. And she said, well, why don't you come and do personal training sales? And I said, I don't know anything about sales. She said, don't worry, I'll teach you everything you need to know. So I actually got into personal training sales first, which
That
again, looking back,
that's super
super
cool.
grateful. Yes, obviously a skill we all need. And so I was doing that for a really, really long time. And I was making good money, but I was not passionate about it, obviously. And so it was actually my dad got sick. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And it kind of just really dramatically shifted the way that I looked at life because I was like, here's a man that's worked super hard his entire life and he's not going to be able to live to see his own retirement. So I was like, why am I working a job that I don't really love? And so that's when I switched to training athletes specifically. A job presented itself. I'm like, okay, it's a huge pay cut, but at least I'll be doing what I love. And so that's when I actually got into training other people.
Yeah, and I think that was maybe, like, more in the realm of when, you and I had first, interacted and met. I feel like you were in more of, like, an athletic training environment, coaching and training, doing a lot of, like, a lot of hands-on, right? I mean, like, how many hours a day were you training, like, when you were at your busiest doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I was at the gym from like 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. a lot of days, just like running myself into the ground, really. It's kind of funny looking back at how much I was working versus now I'm making so much more money for so much less time. It's a wild, wild ride.
And if you look back at that too, because I think a lot of people hear that, right? They hear about getting into fitness and training. They love training, they love working out, they wanna help other people. But there's like that element of those first few years of grinding away that they're like, "Oh gosh, I wanna skip that," right? So maybe if I go right into online, which is a different question altogether, but what do you feel like you learned and gained most from those years when you were, right? Or that period of time when you're like, "Man, I'm training a lot. I'm not getting paid a lot, but I'm training a ton." That now obviously, like, makes you better at what you do. What do you feel like were, like, the biggest takeaways for you or the biggest benefit of doing that?
Yeah, I definitely think experience is always going to be the best teacher. So working with a wide variety of people and just, their motivations, limitations, I just that personable skill, I think is not something that's easily replicated. I think I learned the most when I was doing my internships in college actually, and I was working under other strength and conditioning coaches who were also athletic therapists and watching them run their business. That taught me a lot to then do my own in-person training.
Yeah.
And then the sales obviously was a huge, huge part of what allowed me to be successful on the internet because you can know as much as, the smartest person in the room, but if someone doesn't want to hire you, you're not going to make any money. So I think while the in-person training definitely helped me, I think the sales experience is probably the most important.
Yeah, and it's funny because now I find myself as we're talking with, like, some of the larger gym chains about what they're doing with education and trainers, like, flipping the script and trying to have them, like you did, right? Like, focus more on sales first because it's probably what it's gonna take to make it, and the fitness stuff can always be taught, even though that's what we love, right? Like, it's the nerd out stuff, but it's not maybe what matters most for a lot of people.
Yeah, and especially too because, one quote that always stuck with me when I was learning was sell people what they want, give them what they need, right? Because a lot of the fancy words and what we know they need, it's not sexy, it's not salesy. People are kind of like, oh, I don't know, I just want whatever they want, and you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get you that, and then you can figure out the how you're gonna get there after.
Yeah, try to sell them like slow tempo and isometrics and see how exciting that is. I like that. So, more specifically for you, especially being a female coach in the industry, and now granted for me, I find from working with the Axiom Academy, having lots of coaches and trainers get in, the trend of more and more females getting certified, and now from my understanding, actually, well surpassing males in the industry based on the organization, which I think is great. But talk to me about like any like some of the challenges, especially maybe I don't know, like any challenges you had as a female coach, whether it was like training male clients or male athletes or like working inside. Because again, I think the fitness industry has been stereotypically like more male dominated. I think that's changing in a big way. But talk to me a little bit about any experience that you've had with that along the way.
For sure. I think honestly, a lot of it too was my own image of myself and feeling out of place as a woman, worrying about how I was being perceived by other people. Now, obviously, there were definitely instances where, you can kind of point out the sexism and misogyny. For example, when I first started training athletes, it was out of a baseball, primarily a baseball training facility. And I grew up playing volleyball. So in college, when you hop on the bus, you have the men's team, you have the women's team. So it was kind of always around that dynamic. In baseball, there's no women's baseball. It doesn't exist,
Yeah.
right? You have softball, but it's not the same. And so having just being a woman in that environment was super challenging. I remember I would have coaches that would like make comments about me being a distraction to the boys or whatever, just making weird comments. And at the time, you know, being a people pleasing person, I would just kind of like laugh it off or ignore it.
Yeah.
But looking back, like, no, that's super inappropriate. You should not be laughing with your young male players about, the hot female trainer that or whatever. You should be teaching those boys to respect women, but that just wasn't the reality of the situation. So that obviously
Yeah.
very much exists still today, and I think that that is problematic, but I do think it is also changing with more women getting into the gym and, the younger generations having a little bit more respect and equality for the genders, but it is still for sure, I think, a problem, but it exists, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, it does. Even on my end, I've definitely like seen it, observed it, witnessed it. Uh, Kind of in the same thread, then though too. I think back to like whenever I was like first training in college, and like girls in the weight room was obviously not nearly as common as it is now. For all the amazing things that I think that's probably one of the best trends that's happened in the industry in the last 10 years has been the increase in acceptance and honestly just being cool to be like to be strong as a female. And I say that because I know that from what I've gotten to know you as part of your brand. First off, you might be stronger than me, I don't know, right? Like we would have to compare the exercise, but you're a strong chick, which is super cool. But is also like still in some places like still kind of outside the norm. And so first speaking, because I think it's relevant for both. I think for a lot of coaches and trainers, there's still that element of like the exerciser, like you're the strong girl in the gym, and that can be, confrontational at times and other things. Talk to me a little bit about that, your experience with just that side of things, like being a strong girl in the weight room and how that translates to women in fitness.
Yeah, I think in the weight room, it's never an issue that presents itself to me and sort of in my reality in terms of when I say that, I'm not getting comments or conflict in person.
Yeah, yeah,
Online, whole other story, whole other story. But
yeah.
in real life, the people that I know, I think it's cool, right? A lot of men that I know at the gym think it's awesome. They kind of make similar comments like, "Oh, I think you're stronger than me. You could outlift me." Obviously, it's funny. I think me personally, I believe there's biological differences between men and women. Men have
Yeah.
a physical advantage over us. Of course, are there going to be some women that are stronger than some men? Yes. Am I going to say that we're all equal all the time? No. I think it's perfectly fine to acknowledge those differences and still think that women can be strong and badass, and so can men. I don't really love the like gender war that starts to happen. But again, that's really something I only see online. If I post something, it's usually men that are kinda getting angry, leaving weird comments, and fighting with the women back and forth over who's stronger and what's possible, and I'm just like, I can't expend my energy in this
It's a
world.
it's a losing conversation just to even
Yeah.
get engaged with a lot of it, yeah. Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you speaking to that because I think those are things like, I think for like women versus men getting into training, I do believe like the industry has changed a lot. And I mean, I see that truthfully as someone who's managed and hired and worked with like many of both sexes. Like, I think there's a lot of things that like female coaches bring to the table that sometimes our male trainers and coaches lacked, empathy, connection, all kinds of stuff. Again, don't want to stereotype, but that's my experience. But yeah, so going into like, let's talk a little bit about your transition into online then, right? Obviously you put in work, right? You didn't just jump into online training. Like you worked a lot with people in person first. And then from what we were talking about, like COVID didn't really give you a big opportunity. Like you were in Canada and things were shut down, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
talk to me about that transition into the online, like what did that look like initially? How were you starting to get clients? Just kind of give me some of that.
Yes. So when COVID happened, I was in the GTA specifically. So what Canada was doing is they were shutting down COVID hotspots, aka wherever the most populated cities were that also of course had the most cases because most people lived there. So the gyms, they almost were closed for almost an entire year. They would kind of open it for like a month and then shut them back down again.
Crazy. Just crazy.
Just crazy, and so I was like, "I can't live like this waiting for the government to tell me when I can and can't collect a paycheck." So then I had an online presence, but I also was dealing with a little bit of, I guess, imposter syndrome, you could say, like, "Who am I to do this?" Right? And so eventually I just was like, bit the bullet, and I was like, "I'm hiring a business coach." I think my first business coach was like maybe $10,000, and that was a terrifying investment at the time because What if this doesn't work out, right? Like all the
Yeah.
scary things we wanna say to ourselves. But I just implemented everything that she told me to do, and then it was almost like, "Oh, this is so much easier than I thought it was gonna be." And when I say easy, I mean, obviously, it's still hard work, but the return on investment was amazing, and I'm so glad that I was pushed to make that decision because naturally as human beings, we stay in our comfort zone and what's comfortable, right? And what's comfortable is collecting a steady paycheck, doing what we've always known, because the unknown is scary. But that's where the most growth happens, right? So ultimately, I'm glad I was pushed into that decision, and that obviously led me to where I am today, which I'm grateful for.
And were you skeptical about online training? Or I mean, I say that too because I feel like from a lot of the in-person coaches, and I can relate to it as well, having trained people in person for a long time, that there's like an element of like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this with people online. Like, were you skeptical of your ability to help people that way?
Yes, I was for sure. That's exactly what I thought. I'm like, how am I going to teach them all the small little intricacies that they need to know without being with them in person? And what I've learned is I think there can actually be more value because when you're in person, sometimes the client relies too much on you to correct them in real time versus when you're not with them, they have to pay attention to themselves because if they're going to ask questions, they have to internalize that information more to explain to you what they're feeling if a technique is off for them, and they really have to pay more attention. So I think that can almost be more beneficial in terms of learning long term because they can't rely on you to just tell them in the moment, oh, fix this, do that, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really cool point because I think for anybody who's listening who is training clients, had that experience or has like, trained quite a few clients now, you definitely do have those people that, it's like the same coaching cue for 3 years. You're like, you're never gonna figure it out because they don't have to, right? Like literally, why would they? They don't have to, that you're there.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I like that perspective. And now that you've been, doing the online coaching and training for a while, how has that evolved for you? I mean, I know you were talking about you've been primarily like one-on-one with people still, right? Like kind of more individualized programming for quite some time. And now some of that's changing. So would you talk to us a little bit about like, what you were doing initially, what that looked like, and then also like how your opportunities to work with people have evolved?
Yes. So I started out just doing one on one. And obviously, there's a cap to that. You can only work with so many people. And I've kind of noticed as my audience is growing, you also got to think, okay, how am I going to grow my business? Because I've never identified as like a business person or aspired to be an entrepreneur. So, as much as I love fitness and I love helping people, that's always been a passion of mine. Business has not. But you can't really have one without the other if you want to be successful, right? So for a long time, I thought the next steps for me would be hiring a team, right? Okay, well then I got to have a team of coaches under me. I got to hire, someone to handle my DMs. And I've just always avoided taking that next step because it just didn't really feel aligned with me. But I know a lot of people who love that, right? And I think it
Yeah.
ultimately comes down to who you are and what you want to do and what you're passionate about. So now I'm kind of leaning more into um, having more passive income from pre-packaged programs. So right now I have a mobility program that I sell that's completely done. I don't have to do anything to it. People just buy it and then minus I told you I was having a little bit of a technical issue with the checkout today that I got to get fixed. People just buy it and then it's done. I really don't have to do anything. So when I have a post that goes viral and millions of people see it and they're like, "Oh, I want to work on my ability. Oh, this program's only $20." It's a very easy sell. I don't have to hop on a sales call and ask people for, $2,000 and all that kind of stuff. So that's where the next phase is. And that doesn't involve me hiring a team and having to manage people. So there's so many ways to make money, especially on the internet, that sometimes I think people get too caught up in thinking they have to copy, someone else's business model. And maybe that business model isn't for you. And you have to figure out what is for you and what's sustainable for you and what you actually like to do that you can do long term so you don't burn yourself out and hate your life.
And say it's great to make money, but not if you don't enjoy it, right? You find yourself right back to the LA fitness sales job.
Exactly.
Um, So for individuals who, let's say they aspire to, right? Either, and especially I think it's challenge. It can be challenging as a new trainer, but regardless, like let's say someone's getting into training, or they're like in the process of getting certified, and their long-term goal might be to have some version of an online business, whatever that might look like. What do you think the most viable pathway for people is, just from your experience now having done it yourself, and then maybe now being around others who are doing it or have done it? What do you see as the most common pathway of success? You know, jumping right into online training, doing in person first. Like, give me your thoughts on that question.
That's a really good question, and I don't know that there is one most viable pathway. I think it ties into what I was saying before. Just being authentic to yourself and what you actually like to do. If you hate TikTok, maybe TikTok isn't the most viable pathway for you, right? I think it comes down to what do you actually like doing, because if you like it, you're likely to replicate it. With that being said, you are gonna have to be pushed outside of your comfort zone. So if you don't like doing something, you gotta dig down to the deeper reason why. Is it because you're afraid of being judged? That's not really a good reason, right? You wanna figure out play to your skill sets, but at the same time, don't hold back from something because of your own mindset. So I think while it's okay to focus on the algorithms and the platforms and the content creation, you also have to work on yourself and like read the personal development books, work on your mindset so that you're not letting things like fear and rejection hold you back from doing what you need to do to be successful, you know?
Or the crazy comments from the people who are gonna slide into your messages, right?
Have to have thick skin. And that is something that's not easy. And I'm able to see a big difference in myself now. I remember, I think maybe 2 years ago, I made a TikTok. It was just a trend. It was like a little Eminem soundtrack that, was talking about people wanna be like me or they want XYZ until they figure out, whatever comes with it. And so I had said, people say they want legs like mine until, and I had said, train legs 3 to 4 days a week, drink lots of water, stretch after your workouts, and get lots of sleep. Like it was all about recovery, but also like
Yeah.
that, train my legs 3 to 4 days a week. That's what I do. And the internet went nuts. This girl, she made a video about me about how I'm overtraining and this is so dangerous and why you shouldn't do that. Which I understand her perspective because she's looking at it from a bodybuilding lens, right? Bodybuilders will probably only train their legs once or twice a week, which is fine, but that's not the only way, you can exercise. And so I got attacked on this comment and I was like so upset, like physically, like my heart was racing and I was like experiencing all of these like visceral reactions because that was the first time I had really received so much hate. Because before, when my video went viral, it was super positive experience. There wasn't a lot
Yeah,
of
nothing
hate.
but
This was
love.
like this was mostly hate, and I had never experienced anything like that. And so I've gotten way better at distancing myself from other people's perceptions, but it's not an easy thing if you're not used to it because we're
Yeah.
not really designed for millions and millions of eyes to be on you and judging you from like a 6 second clip. It's a bizarre thing, but it comes with the territory, you know.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good message for a lot of people too. Is like there's a lot of potential upside, but there's like negatives to that's everything in life, right? There's gonna be two sides of the coin, and I think even just the process of putting yourself out there, I think is challenging for a lot of people. Even on the side of just like, I know even for a lot of our students or those who follow us, for getting started and getting certified, just now starting to tell people like, hey, I'm a personal trainer, like that is a lot of fear for people because like, who am I? Should I really be training people, even if it's not online? So that's why say think about it's just magnified online because you get so many more people in front of you.
So many more people. And my business coach, my first business coach, also gave me a quote that stuck with me forever. Two things. One, polarizing is monetizing. And so you have to ruffle some feathers to
Yeah.
bring the people that you want to work with, right? Because sure, maybe your message isn't for everyone. You're not trying to sell those people. You're not trying to work with the people who vehemently disagree with what you're saying, but it will attract the people who do. And those are the people that you want to work with ultimately. And yeah, you can't let fear hold you back. I think that's one of the biggest messages because you have to put yourself out there, right?
Yeah, you got to. And so for obviously you've done a lot of in-person training. You're now primarily in the online world. But I would imagine you still have these training philosophies that have still translated across both platforms and both like all these ways of serving people. And this is something that for me, even in meeting you initially, like I could pick up from our conversations that you were an intelligent coach and trainer. You had some principles that guided what you're doing. And I saw that even in your content before you went TikTok famous. So talk to me about your training philosophy for your clients. Like, what are some of the core pillars and principles that come across and how you work with clients now, mostly in the online world?
Yeah, I think for a long time, the online fitness industry was sort of dominated by bodybuilders. When people thought fitness, they thought bodybuilding, super lean bodies, super shredded. And
Yeah.
with my background again in athletic therapy, my philosophy is movement quality first and foremost, right? And that's what guides my principles is making sure people have that solid foundation of how to move their body, which is just you know the basic movements. And so a lot of times a common feedback I sort of get from my clients when they first see their first phase of programming, they're kind of like, that's it, like they're a little bit taken aback at the lack of weightlifting I actually have them doing, because it's a lot of body weight, a lot of stability stuff, and then they go through the workout and they're like, oh, that was actually really challenging.
Yeah.
And
They're
so
like, okay, I get it.
I prefer, yeah, to work with beginners because I'm like, I want to teach you just like the very basics of very good movement quality, how your shoulder blades should move, how to breathe diaphragmatically, how to engage your core, what mind muscle connection really is. I think that's a term that's kind of gotten clouded by the industry. People love, or fitness people love to argue over semantics over what stuff really means. And I'm like, for example, whether your glutes are turned on or off. And like, sure, saying that is not a technically correct term, but when we're talking to general population, it doesn't really matter that they understand, neurons firing as much as they need to understand how to get a proper glute contraction. So
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, and so which I think is great, but maybe also like I asked you earlier about the challenge for some in-person coaches translating over there, even more so for someone like you who's like an athletic trainer wanting to have that movement quality. How do you coach that? And then even how do you quality assure, like check those things with your online coaches? Give me some insight into like even like tactically how you do that with your clients because I'm very interested.
Yeah, good question. So before I have anyone start their program, I have basically what I call like an onboarding week where I have a pre-made set of videos that go over basically how I want them to train. So I explain, what mind muscle connection means to me so that we're on the same page, how to engage their core properly, how to breathe diaphragmatically, how I want them. I have a video called like lower body basics where we go over, grabbing the floor with your foot, externally rotating at the hip, how to create tension in your lower body. We go over like principles of irradiation to make sure that they know how to create tension in one area of their body to be stronger in another. Squats, deadlifts, hip hinges. We go over all that stuff, scapulothoracic rhythm, so that by the time their program actually starts, they have a good basic understanding of how their body should move and how to create good tension in their body. And then on top of that, my basic guiding principle is, how does an exercise feel? So when they go into an exercise, they should know what is the target muscle, where they should primarily be feeling it. And if those two things align 9 times out of 10, their form's going to be good, right? And then, of course, on
Yeah.
top of that, with technology now, you just send me video feedback, and between how it feels and how it looks, we can figure it all out.
That's cool. I mean, hey, I feel like you just described what a lot of trainers need is like a little video, right? And getting started. I feel like it sounds like you put a lot of time into educating your clients. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I'm not mistaken, I feel like that was one of your core pillars or principles, even on your website was like education for clients. And it also sounds like, I mean, from an online standpoint, it sounds like that's like time consuming and not in a bad way, but I mean, from the client standpoint, like obviously if they're going to onboard and train with you, the expectation is they're going to have to spend time to learn these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's one of those things that once you learn it and it's internalized, it's like a lot of work in the beginning, but then not so much, because once you learn that information, it saves you a lot of time in the future troubleshooting, oh, why do I feel this, or why do I have this pain, or XYZ. So for me, I don't actually spend so much time coaching my clients, because a lot of that stuff, again, it's pre-made, right? Everyone gets it. I
Yeah.
only have to do the work one time.
Yeah.
And so right away, people a month into their program, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. My pain is alleviated. I feel so much better. And I haven't actually done that much work aside from creating their program, right? Because I took the time in the beginning to explain everything to them. It's very actual low work on my end, but it has huge results on their end. Versus, right, if I didn't have that and I just kind of gave them their program, then they're going to come at me with a million questions about how to do XYZ. And then I'm sure probably my work would be overwhelming.
Yeah. Have you, along the way, have you encountered clients who are like resistant to that initial phase? I know you mentioned that some people being kind of surprised, but have you encountered clients who like weren't very adherent to it, or who pushed back a little bit more? Maybe that's not the right term, but you know what I mean? Like who, are bought into that process, because it is different. It might be different than how a lot of people have trained before.
That's a good question. Personally, no. I think that your energy attracts like energy. So I think because of the type of content that I put out, that's what people expect from me. If
Yeah.
I was your typical, if I marketed myself, I was like, oh, here's my 30-day shred program, lose body fat, and kind of did your typical marketing where I'm just targeting weight loss or fat loss, I think
Yeah.
I would meet a lot more of those clients. But because I'm very true and authentic to who I am in my content creation, I think I just attract the right type of client to me, which is also why a lot of my advice to personal trainers is be authentic. Because if you try to copy somebody else and it's not who you really are, you're not going to have a good time. You want to make sure you are true to yourself so you actually enjoy the process.
Love that. And obviously now it's become much more of like you said, what you're doing is much more of a business to you. But, even in your putting things out, you can call it content creation, call it just like adding value to the world. When you were doing more in-person training, was it the same type of stuff you were putting out then as well? Like that's kind of been your MO and kind of your let's call it like your avatar, for a while with training, is like putting out information on like more movement quality, like those same things.
I would say in the beginning, not so much. In the beginning, I kind of didn't really know what I was doing. It was just sort of like random stuff. When I
Yeah.
hired my first business coach, she really taught me, how to create content to make money, because it was very different than what I was doing before. It was like, well,
Yeah.
what's going to get me the most engagement, right? Oh, okay, pictures of me in a bikini or whatever. And at the time, I think most of my following was men,
Yep.
because, but they're not hiring me for training, right? So then I the way that I was creating my content, and my engagement suffered in terms of I'm not getting as many likes, which is, a little hit to
Yep.
the ego, but I
Yeah.
started making more money. Now my following is like 78% female, which I prefer, because that's the type of avatar I want to speak to, right? So initially, yeah,
Yeah.
my content does take a hit, because I have noticed the people that are filling out my training applications, they're like, "Oh, I've followed you for years. I've been thinking about this for a year." I've never seen them comment on anything that I've done, or they're not engaging with my stuff all the time, but they're watching it, they're finding value, they're kind of like behind the scenes, but then they're the ones that are going to be paying me at the end of the day. So you can't get
Yeah.
too caught up in the algorithm and, engagement. Obviously, you got to pay attention a little bit to draw eyes to you, but it's not always necessarily what's going to put money in your pocket.
Yeah, well, and I feel like, I mean, to speak to, like, I feel like the takeaway that I took from that too is just longevity in what you're doing. Like, you got people who are following you for a year or 2 or more
Mhm.
before they do anything, especially in the online world, right? Like, people are just taking their time to get to know you, and
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge. A lot of people, let's say they do wanna do something in online, they post on Instagram consistently for a month and nothing happens, and so they're like, "Oh, this isn't for me," right?
Yeah. Yeah, gotta play the
That's
long
obvious.
game.
Love that. So let's talk about like when you first started doing your online training. Um, did you already have like a captive audience? Like as soon the moment you started launching training, did you have in-person people that you moved to online? Was it only your digital? And more so, because what I'm trying to get out of this is for those who, as they do start to try to, let's say, launch some sort of or some part of online business to what they're doing, how they can go about starting to get their first clients, right? Even just the first few to get momentum.
Yeah, I did transition some from or from in person to online. I will say that's a little bit more of a challenging transition because they're so used to that time. Because I know I had a
Yeah.
lot of people where you almost feel like they're not even necessarily hiring you for training so much as they just like hanging out with you, right? They just like that
They just
hour.
want to hang out with you twice a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I think the best piece of advice I got from my business coach is like, you need to tell people what you do often. So as much as I hadn't like, I remember the first year, I still had people, or to this day, I still have people that ask like, "Do you do online training?" And I'm like, my name on Instagram is online coach, but they still some people put two and two together. So you
Yeah.
think you're being annoying because you're always saying like, "Hey, this is what I do," or "Hire me," or whatever. But you have to be quote unquote annoying. No one pays as much attention to you as you do yourself. So when you feel like you're being annoying and repetitive, your audience isn't getting that same perception. So you got to put yourself out there a lot and always be talking about what you do.
And how do you gauge, like, literally, maybe again, tactically, how you gauge, success for your clients? And then also, like, how do you just gauge success for the people that you're working with? Do you have specific, like, protocols, measurements? Is that different for every client? Like, how do you do some of that in the online world as far as tracking progress for people?
Yes, it is different for every client, but typically we'll do photos, fasting weigh-ins, and circumference measurements, and if body recomposition is a goal for them, and then just movement quality as well. And that depends on what issues they present. So a lot of times we're looking at, are they experiencing pain? Is their range of motion better? And then obviously, of course, if they're getting stronger, which is all stuff tracked in their program.
And for those who do want to do more online training in the future, what is like, talk to us about like a couple of the biggest challenges. I say challenges or like downsides, right? Like there's upsides and downsides, to everything. I know you talked about getting like crazy comments and putting yourself out there. So, maybe that's part of it. But what are maybe some unforeseen challenges, barriers, or negatives to, like, making your life in online training?
For me, the biggest challenge is essentially being my own boss and not having a real schedule to adhere to, right? When you're in person, you have your schedule. It's whenever people are going to book in. You got to show up to the gym. You got to do your sessions. When you're online, it's totally up to you when and where you do things. So some people are really good at staying regimented. Me, not so much. I don't like, even when I was in high school, I never liked studying at home. So, same thing now. I don't like doing my work at home. So, I will go to Starbucks I'm not even a big coffee person. I just like to be outside of the house and like forced to do work because sometimes I'll like clean procrastination where I'm like, maybe I don't really need to do like the laundry or clean, but I'm like, I'll just do this first and then I'll
Yeah.
get to those emails. So for me, it's just kind of keeping a schedule and finding ways to stay regimented with myself because you can always do it later or whenever. So keeping a schedule is something that I've struggled with and not something I, foresaw.
Yeah. And then, like, what's the absolute best? Like, what's the best part of what you're doing now versus what you were doing 3 to 4 years ago?
The freedom, absolutely. I can pick up, leave. All I need is a Wi-Fi connection, right? Now I need more friends who have the same schedule, but yeah, that's for sure the best.
And you're doing that here soon, right? Sometime this year, you said you were going where for a couple of months?
Oh yeah, I'll be at Costa Rica in the fall. So I'm done with winter. I've spent enough Canadian winters here. I'm over it. I'm not doing it again.
Yep.
But that is something too that I'm starting to add into my online business is fitness retreats. So that'll be
Mhm.
my first one that I'm running the end of this year, and then hopefully I can turn that into an annual thing, and then even do a few more trips. So a lot of people I know can't come to this one, but they're like, "Oh, please run another one." So that's the next business piece to that puzzle.
That's awesome. And I know you mentioned now you're doing some more stuff to reach more people with like more low ticket opportunities for people to work with you as well. But in the main piece of what you've been doing online with one on one, because I think this is a good thing for people to think about too, is like how many people they're going to really be able to work with. How have you found kind of your sweet spot? Like when it comes to the one on one coaching, like the most people you're working with at once versus like where you feel like your sweet spot is. What's ideal for you? How many clients are you really able to like do well with at any given time?
Yeah, so I prefer to work between with like 20 to 30 one-to-one.
Mhm.
I can take more, but I don't like to take less than 20, and I don't like to I won't take more than 50 for sure, but around 30 is kind of where I prefer to be.
Yeah. And obviously, like, online it's different, but I think that's maybe the also the confusion for people is how much time they're still really going to put in. So, like, let's just say per person, like how much time might you spend every week like really making sure that someone's like, training is on point, contact points, touch points, like all that stuff. How often or how much time estimate, whatever, give us a ballpark any given week are you spending on an individual client? Just to give someone else more perspective who's not doing anything on the online yet.
Yeah, so I would say between like 10 to 30 minutes if they're like crushing it. You obviously don't have to do too much. And I think that circles back to setting them up for success in the beginning because you can have a lot of pre-made resources for them and that
Yeah.
cuts the time that you need to speak with them. Because you can't like some people will have video check-ins every week. I found that I don't need that. I used to think that I did. Um, but when you set them up for success, you really don't need to touch base with them all that much between a few texts here and there. Because most of my clients, their weekly check-ins, I ask them, "Where do you need support?" And 9 times out of 10, no, not everything's good on my end. So it's not as much as I thought I would need.
Yeah. And then in regards to, obviously like a big part of building your business and your potential in the online, we can't talk about that without talking about personal branding and building a strong personal brand. So when you hear those words, you hear like branding, personal brand, like what does that mean to you? And then also how do you go about, especially for someone who's maybe just getting started or who doesn't have a big following, how do you start to build a personal brand?
It's a good question. You have to be authentic and not be afraid to speak to people. So that's kind of feedback that I get a lot is people they feel like they kind of know you when you're not afraid to put yourself out there. A lot of people are afraid to speak on camera and it's an uncomfortable thing to do at first, right? Speaking into your phone, you feel like you're speaking to nobody, or even
Yeah,
going live. So a lot of times, what I'll do, like, I'll do the stairmaster. I like to train at 5 o'clock in the morning. I will
it's
live
exactly what I
stream
was
my
gonna say. I see you go. I'm like, yep, she's live on a Stairmaster right now. I love it.
and it does two things. For me, it makes the time go by faster, and it's an easy way to connect with my audience. But it is a little awkward because you're essentially having a conversation with yourself. Because your audience isn't always going to be engaged. They're not necessarily always going to ask you questions. So just kind of go in with like a story, maybe about like your clients, right? And you can kind of speak to um, a client's success that you've had in person and tell that story to the online world, right? Then you're doing two things. You're engaging with your audience, and then you're also putting that into their mind of how you're able to get someone else success. So that kind of plants the seed. Um, I think that is the easiest way to build connection with your audience, but it's also the scariest for most people. But no risk, no reward. Staying true and authentic to yourself and just giving them something helpful, a tip. You want to showcase a little bit of your personality as well. So it's kind of balancing between giving content that's entertaining and engaging, and then that's also helpful, and then also asking for the sale. It's like a little delicate balance between those types of content.
And have you always been like comfortable speaking? I mean, either a like speaking to people or like speaking to groups, like public speaking when you were in high school. Like, was that your thing or not so much?
I would say, yeah, I was pretty comfortable speaking in front of people. My dad was a very loud Italian man, so I think that's probably where I get it from.
Yep.
But definitely with the social media side, not as much. Like, it was something I had to just kinda, like, bite the bullet and just do it. It's an uncomfortable sensation talking into your phone, but now it's, like, second nature. You just pretend you're, like, on FaceTime with someone, like, how you would speak to a friend is how you were gonna speak to your audience, but, it's a natural human aversion to fear judgment and putting yourself out there. I talk to people all the time that wanna do something similar, and, I tell them, "Well, you gotta, speak on your stories," and they're kinda like, "Oh, I can't." I'm like, "You got to."
Can't get around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. That's awesome. I
People
love that.
Yeah. People buy from people they know, like, and trust, so if you don't put yourself out there, then they're not gonna really feel like they know you or trust you.
Well, and I feel like we've covered some pretty good ground on, first off, I think understanding a little bit of like your journey being thrust into the online world. And kind of like your experience in building your brand. Any other, like, just pieces of advice, especially in the online training world? Because I do think that that's something, based on where we're at so far inside the podcast, we haven't had a lot of people on the podcast that have really built their full training. They might have a little bit, right? They might do a little bit of online programming, but they're still doing most of their work in person. Any like pieces of advice or just areas of or focus for those people who really like they want to get there. They want to get there. They see the benefit. They see someone amazing like you, who's an awesome person helping a lot of people. Anything that we haven't talked about that you think people should either hear or know more about or just focus on?
I think the best piece of advice I can give someone that wants to do that is to just hire a coach. It's almost interesting the amount of personal trainers that I see that want to get into an online coaching business, but won't hire an online coach themselves. I find it kind of ironic because it's like you want people to invest in you as a coach, but you're not going to invest in a coach yourself. I feel like it's a little bit out of sync. So I think, it's valuable when you can have someone else teach you things that you need to know. Save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle. Yeah, it's going to cost you some money, but that's the investment it takes at the end of the day.
Yeah, that to me, that might be the most powerful thing that you said so far is the investment in the coaching. And if you had to guess, now that you've been doing the online and obviously you did in-person stuff before, but like, I mean, how much have you spent on coaching? Like what are you spending on business coaching every year now for what you're trying to do?
I think in total, probably in the last 3 years, I think I've spent probably like between like 30, $50,000 probably on coaches. I've had 3 different coaches, so far, and everyone is different. But like I mentioned earlier, the keeping a schedule and that accountability of just working for yourself is something that I struggle with. So just like our clients, when you have someone to answer to, you just perform better. And that's not everyone. Some people are incredibly self motivated and dedicated, but most people need that little bit of extra layer of accountability and someone to not only answer to, but also to bounce ideas off of. It saves you so much time figuring things out. And then you invest the money up front, but how much time are you saving back that you can then go and make more money because you can focus on money making activities rather than Googling, how to figure out Stripe or what are the tech issues that present itself.
And do you think you would have gone this route? Do you think you would have gotten into online training if it wasn't for COVID?
I think I would have tried, but not as successfully because when I had that safety net, and then you always have that excuse, oh, I'm tired, I've worked a 12-hour day, or like, just kind of like pushing it off. I think
Yeah.
being forced to go 100% into it was the best case scenario for me.
I love it. Well, I appreciate all that you've given to everybody who's listening or hopefully watching. And if any of you guys are again listening, just know that there is video versions of this podcast on Spotify as well as on YouTube. And for those who want to and need to now connect more with you, Melissa, where should people best follow you?
Instagram and TikTok are my main platforms, and now I have a Facebook page randomly popping off, which is really just a repeat version of my Instagram page, and they're all at Melissa Cap.
Love it. Awesome. We'll make sure we put some links to those things in the description for the show and for you guys listening. One of the best ways to learn, obviously, like Melissa said, you need to invest in a coach in some capacity, even if it's in the in-person space. I believe coaching and mentorship are going to get you there a lot faster and consistently. That's what you hear from all the people that are on the show. And then the best thing you can do is also just like watch and see what she's doing. Don't copy it, right? Because she said, be you. But here's someone who's had a lot of success in the training space in the online world. And I feel like you're just getting started, Melissa. So I'm excited to continue to follow all that you're up to with the retreat, with all of your other programs. And I'm going to have to go back. I'm going to have to try the shrimp squat again, because now that I remember it, I still remember watching it, and I'm one who couldn't do it. So I'm going to have to go back and try again.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for having me.